Let's talk about how to process text files. Text is a huge part of our lives, and we have data in textual formats that come from all kinds of places. We get email, we have machines that generate data, we might have scientific equipment, we might have uh, uh, blog comments, we might have newspaper articles, we might have student homeworks, we might have structured data that comes from NASDAQ, from stock exchange. The reality is there's just a huge amount of data that is in a textual format that we often need to process no matter what field we're in. Python, it turns out, is a great language for processing data and making sense of it, doing just about anything with it, extracting the pieces you want so that you can then start to quantify it. I thought we would look at some very simple data, which is something that I get on every day from the University of Maryland, which is the FYI email. And so if I look at one of these, you may get this as well. This is an email that I get basically every day, and it comes with some topics, then some introductory stuff, then a bunch of dashes, followed by some header information, followed by some other information, subject, where, spaces, colon. And then this particular day, there were only 3 of them. Notice this second one, there was a subject, a where, a when, and a where. The previous one didn't have a when. And then other items have different kinds of information. Let's look at this one, FYI2. Again, it's the same basic structure, but the content varies. And look at FYI3. This is interesting because on this day, there were 26 items. And let's just scroll through because I want to show you that there are different kinds of information. So this one has website, and it says website colon and then the associated website. And the interesting thing about this email, even though it's sort of text, it's in a semi-structured format. There's some pieces of information that when they exist, they're in a same kind of format. And that gives us the possibility of making sense of this. So the way you make sense of a text file is by going through a process called parsing. Parsing is a word that means to take a string of characters that you get when you read the content of a text file and breaking it up into the individual components so that you can extract whatever elements you want. You might have data that is highly structured, you might have data like this that's semi-structured, or you might have free text that is not structured at all. The kind of parsing we're talking about makes more sense for semi-structured or structured text. So in order to do anything, we've got to start by reading the contents of these text files into our Python program. You'll see here that I've made a data directory with these text files, and I made an empty file called text files. And what we can start by doing is I can introduce you to some of the built-in functions in Python for reading in text files. We can use the open built-in open function. It takes a file name. I'm going to give it the file name data at the directory /fyi1.txt. And we can decide, you have to say what you want to do with it. We just want to read from it, so I'm going to give it a second parameter, which is r for read. This is going to return a handle to an object called a file, which will enable us to manipulate the file. And there's different things we can do with that file, that f. We can, perhaps the simplest thing is read all of the contents of it. Okay, we can store that in a string. Maybe I'll put that into data, into a variable called data. And now in my Python program, if I were to print data, and I run this, we get an error because I misspelled this. Let's try again, run this, and in the output, we got the full content of this file. For this kind of small text file, that's just fine. It reads the entire file into memory and then processes it. On the other hand, what if this was a big data file from some machine output and it was gigabytes long? We might not even have enough RAM in our computer to read the whole thing in. And if we did, it would certainly be inefficient. So an alternative and more efficient way to deal with potentially large data sets is to read one line at a time. And there is a built-in method into this file handler called readLine that'll read just one line up to a carriage return. And you can keep on reading until you get basically nothing, until you get none. That's a fine way to do it, but you have to implement your while loop and so on. So this is such a common pattern that perhaps it's not surprising that Python has an easier way to do this. You can say for line in your file handle, and the file that gets returned by open is something that is iterable and you can put into a for loop, and now for each iteration of this loop you'll get exactly one line. So now I can print the line just to see what it is, and again if I run it I'll get the same results, but now instead of reading the entire thing into memory it's only reading in one line at a time. Okay, this is good, but there's actually one thing that we really need to do, which is to close the file. Now when our program exits, the file will get automatically closed for us. But it's good at practice to always close your files, because maybe your program doesn't exit right away and it stays running for a long time because it's doing some other things. And in that case, you will have held a lock onto this file and used up some computer resources. So you really have to say close after you say open. Unfortunately, it's very easy to forget to do that. And what happens if you end up calling some other functions, and it can just become a bit of a mess. So it turns out that Python, in its infinite wisdom, has a built-in mechanism to automatically close files for you. And you can, to do that, I'm going to introduce the with operator. And the way the with works is, I'm not going to go into the detail of exactly how it works, but what you do is you give it a command like open, and you're going to say as f. So what this is going to do, it's a little bit tricky, it's going to call open, it's going to take the result, assign it to f. Notice there's a colon, so it's going to execute the following body of code, and then when the body of code finishes, so when this entire with clause finishes, it'll automatically call close on f. So here's a really nice safe way to do it, and this is now the recommended way for doing file reading.